Before your feet touch the floor, a war has already begun. The darkness strategizes, the heavens stir, and your very first breath of the morning determines which kingdom gains ground. Most people wake unaware, stepping blindly into battles they never see. But you are being summoned to something greater. When you invite God first into your day, the unseen realms shift. Angels are deployed, doors begin aligning, and heaven starts announcing your steps before the world even wakes. This is not routine prayer. This is divine activation. Your morning isn't ordinary. It's a battleground, a courtroom, a throne room, and the birthplace of breakthrough. The question is, who will you invite into it? Before the first hint of dawn touches the horizon, early reports indicate that activity in the unseen realm is already intensifying. Though neighborhoods remain quiet and peaceful, sources from the spiritual front lines confirm a rising surge of motion just beyond natural sight. Analysts describe this window as the contested moment, when the direction of the day begins to take shape long before anyone's feet hit the floor. Investigations from spiritual observers reveal that subtle attempts are made during these early hours to influence thoughts, emotions, and expectations for the day ahead. These efforts often arrive disguised as heaviness, worry, or lingering exhaustion, strategies meant to drain a person before they even wake. Experts note that this silent battle isn't random, but carefully timed to intercept the heart at its most vulnerable point. Correspondents positioned at the morning prayer watchtower report that heaven remains alert and fully active during this time. Signals of divine presence move quietly but powerfully across the atmosphere, preparing strength for anyone who will rise and call on God first. The contrast between these opposing movements sets the stage for a dramatic first choice the moment consciousness returns. Eyewitness accounts from believers around the world confirm that the early morning carries a unique spiritual weight. Many describe waking up with a sense of pressure or urgency without knowing why, later realizing that something significant was occurring beyond what they could see. These testimonies continue to build evidence that the battle before sunrise shapes the spiritual climate of the entire day. Commentary from seasoned prayer leaders highlights the importance of those first waking moments. They warn that ignoring this unseen activity can leave a person emotionally unguarded and mentally scattered, walking straight into the day without spiritual awareness. In contrast, inviting God into the morning immediately rewrites the atmosphere, shifting authority away from chaos and toward divine order. As dawn prepares to break, the report closes with a clear and dramatic conclusion. You are not simply waking up. You are rising onto a battlefield already in motion. The day begins long before daylight appears, and those who recognize the fight are positioned to step into victory, strength, and purpose the moment they open their eyes. Following last hour's report on a heightened pre-dawn spiritual conflict, new developments are emerging as the first light of morning approaches. According to fresh updates from the Heavenly Communications Bureau, an urgent and personal summons is being issued to every believer. This message, described as a direct call from God's throne room, is being broadcast across the spiritual atmosphere with unusual clarity and intensity. Investigators confirm that this call is not general or distant. It is deeply personal. Sources close to the matter describe it as a divine invitation extended to the human heart the moment it stirs awake. Specialists report a sudden shift of tone from the tension of the battlefield to the majesty of a royal audience. The contrast is dramatic, from spiritual warfare to a summons issued by the king himself. Field correspondents report a noticeable change in the spiritual climate as this call goes out. Darkness that was previously active during the pre-dawn hours appears to recoil, losing territory the moment divine presence draws near. Witnesses describe a holy pressure entering the atmosphere, a weight of glory pushing back the remnants of the night's assault. Analysts say this shift signifies that the battle is no longer on the ground. It has moved to the throne room. The summons itself is described as gentle yet commanding, resonating in the inner spirit rather than the natural ear. Many believers have reported waking with an unexplained pull toward prayer, an inner stirring that feels both comforting and urgent. Experts now confirm that this sensation is consistent with what heaven has historically used to draw people into divine encounter. Sources inside the throne room describe a breathtaking scene: radiant light, overwhelming peace, and the unmistakable presence of God awaiting those who respond. Reports suggest that the atmosphere there carries the ability to stabilize a person's entire day before it even begins. Heavenly advisors emphasize that stepping into this presence isn't just devotional, it's strategic. Meanwhile, analysts reviewing the interaction between Chapter 1's battlefield and this current development explain that these two realities are directly connected. The warfare before sunrise seeks to prevent exactly this moment, your entrance into God's presence. The enemy understands that once a person steps in the throne room, clarity replaces confusion, strength replaces weakness, and divine authority overrides every tactic formed during the night. New data coming from spiritual behavior researchers highlight that many people overlook this call because it comes softly, through a peaceful thought, a quiet nudge, or a sudden awareness of God. However, heaven's broadcasts indicate that the reward for responding is immense. The throne room doesn't just restore the heart, it repositions the entire day under God's dominion. Commentators are calling this a morning shift of power. Whereas Chapter 1 exposed the chaotic activity of darkness, Chapter 2 reveals heaven's decisive counteraction, an invitation into the very presence that defeats disorder. Once the call is answered, the believer transitions from a defensive posture to a position of royal authority. Reports also confirm that those who step into the throne room first thing in the morning often experience increased peace, heightened discernment, and accelerated breakthroughs throughout the day. Spiritual advisors say this is not coincidence, but the direct result of aligning one's spirit with heaven before engaging the world. As the morning continues to unfold, the news becomes unmistakably clear. You are not merely called to survive the battlefield. You are called in the throne room where victory is issued. This divine summons stands as heaven's response to every unseen attack reported earlier. And for those who rise and enter, the day ahead will not just begin, it will be transformed. New reports are coming in following the throne room summons issued at daybreak. According to spiritual correspondents positioned across the heavenly front, an unexpected surge of power is now being detected the moment a believer opens their mouth in praise. Analysts confirm that this response, simple as it may seem, creates a seismic disturbance in the atmosphere, breaking the silence with a force that darkness cannot withstand. Sources close to the throne room state that praise acts as an immediate acknowledgement of God's authority. While the unseen battlefield and the divine summons set the stage, it is a believer's spoken praise that activates heaven's intervention. Experts describe this moment as the ignition point, the exact instant when spiritual dominion shifts decisively toward the one who lifts their voice. Field reports from a morning prayer watchtower reveal dramatic changes whenever praise is released. Shadows that lingered during the pre-dawn struggle are seen scattering as though hit by a sudden wave of light. Correspondents note that praise does not simply repel darkness. It dismantles its influence, cuts off its plans, and exposes its weakness. The shift is described as instant and irreversible. Eyewitness testimonies pouring in from around the world describe profound emotional and physical transformation at the moment of praise. People report sudden clarity, unexpected peace, and a sense of divine closeness that was not present moments earlier. Behavioral analysts believe this is because praise reorients a human spirit, turning attention away from fear and toward the God who reigns above every circumstance. Meanwhile, atmospheric researchers confirm that praise resonates beyond the natural world. Readings from a spiritual frequency map show that spoken worship sends ripples through the heavenly realm, forming what experts refer to as corridors of glory. These corridors act like pathways that allow God's presence to flow more tangibly into the life of the one praising. Connections to previous reports are becoming increasingly evident. Chapter 1 revealed a silent but active battlefield. Chapter 2 announced a divine summons to the throne room. Now, Chapter 3 reveals the critical action required from the believer, praise that bridges the battleground and the throne. Commentators stress that this link is essential. Without praise, the throne room invitation remains unanswered. Insiders within the Heavenly Communications Bureau report that praise is not merely emotional expression. It is spiritual legislation. When spoken, it declares God's rule over the day, overriding the influence of fear, fatigue, or confusion left behind by the night. These declarations carry legal weight in the spiritual realm, setting boundaries the enemy cannot cross. In a dramatic revelation, new data shows that praise is the only spiritual act where heaven and earth synchronize simultaneously. As the believer's voice rises, Heaven's response descends. Specialists observing these interactions report a mirrored movement. Every word of praise triggers an immediate release of divine strength, wisdom, and joy from the throne room. Reports also indicate that the moment praise breaks the morning silence, the battle shifts permanently. Darkness loses its stealth advantage. Its early strategies collapse, and its influence evaporates. What began as a subtle pre-dawn struggle now becomes a public declaration of God's victory broadcast across the spiritual atmosphere. Analysts agree. Praise is the believer's first strike of the day. Following the explosive atmospheric shift caused by believers breaking the silence with praise, new updates are emerging from the Heavenly Authority Division. Early reports confirm that the next critical step in the morning progression is the act of declaration, a verbal alignment that establishes God's dominion over the entire day. Analysts warn that while praise opens the gates of heaven, declarations set heaven's rule upon the ground you walk. Sources inside the throne room confirm that declarations act like divine decrees released through human mouths. Once praise has pushed back the lingering shadows in the pre-dawn battlefield, believers are instructed to speak God's promises with boldness. These declarations, officials say, function as spiritual law, binding, authoritative, and immediately recognized by heaven's host. Field correspondents stationed along the spiritual front lines report a noticeable reaction whenever a believer begins to declare the truth of God over their day. Darkness, which retreated during praise surge, appears unable to re-enter the atmosphere. Instead, it is forced further back, as though a new border has been drawn, one reinforced by every spoken decree of faith. Communication analysts note an important connection to the previous chapters. Chapter 1 exposed the enemy's attempt to control the day before it began. Chapter 2 revealed the throne room's invitation. And Chapter 3 showed how praise shattered the silence. Now Chapter 4 reveals a strategy that stabilizes the victory. Declaration. Experts emphasize that without declarations, the morning breakthrough can fade as the day progresses. Reports from believers worldwide describe a powerful shift in their mindset once declarations are spoken. Anxiety dissolves, fear loses its grip, and clarity emerges. Spiritual behavior specialists explain that declarations don't simply change the atmosphere. They change the believer. By speaking God's word, individuals align with heaven's narrative rather than the enemy's early whispers. Meanwhile, the Heavenly Enforcement Agency confirms that declarations authorize angelic intervention throughout the day. When a person declares peace, angels enforce peace. When one declares protection, angels secure the path. When strength is spoken, divine empowerment is dispatched instantly. Insiders reveal that angels respond to faith-filled words like soldiers responding to a commander's orders. Newly released data from atmospheric monitors shows that declarations create what analysts are calling zones of sovereignty, areas where God's dominion is uniquely active. These zones extend into homes, workplaces, travel routes, and decision-making moments. Specialists emphasize that wherever God's dominion is declared, chaos loses its influence. Correspondents also highlight the dramatic contrast between silent mornings and spoken mornings. Silence leaves space for the enemy to fill the atmosphere with doubt, distraction, and discouragement, but declarations replace that noise with divine certainty. Officials note that a declared morning becomes an ordered morning, a day that bends toward blessing rather than confusion. Eyewitness reports from seasoned intercessors suggest that declarations serve as prophetic shaping tools. The words spoken in the first minutes of the day carve out the spiritual structure of the hours ahead. Every decree, whether about peace, purpose, strength, favor, or protection, lays down a path that heaven honors throughout the day. Commentators are calling this morning architecture. As today's report concludes, the news grows unmistakably dramatic. The believer who praises is open heaven, but the believer who declares establishes God's rule over every step ahead. The battle before sunrise has been exposed. The throne room has been entered. Praise has shattered the silence. And now declarations seal the victory, securing the day under divine authority. This is not routine prayer. It is a commanding voice of a child of the King shaping their day with heaven's power. Breaking updates are arriving from the Heavenly Defense Command following the wave of declarations released across the spiritual realm in the previous hour. Officials confirm that once a believer establishes God's dominion with spoken decrees, Heaven responds by placing a protective covering over their life. This divine covering, referred to by analysts as the armor of light, is now being reported as the next critical development in the unfolding morning sequence. Sources within the throne room reveal that this armor of light is not symbolic, but profoundly active. Unlike physical armor, which shields only the body, the spiritual armor surrounds the mind, emotions, and atmosphere of the believer. Experts describe it as a radiant barrier that darkness cannot pass through, a shield forged from the very presence of God that accompanies a believer throughout the day. Field correspondents stationed across the spiritual frontier report significant changes whenever this armor is received. The moment it descends, attempts by darkness to reestablish influence are blocked instantly. Analysts observing the atmosphere describe a noticeable shift. Wherever the armor of light settles, the spiritual environment becomes impenetrable, stable, and charged with divine presence. Connections to earlier chapters are becoming increasingly evident. Chapter 1 revealed the early morning attacks designed to weaken the heart. Chapter 2 opened the door to the throne room. Chapter 3 unleashed the explosive power of praise. And Chapter 4 established dominion through declaration. Now, Chapter 5 reveals heaven's response, a divine reinforcement that locks in everything achieved so far. Commentators say this is the moment the believer moves from breakthrough to secure victory. Eyewitness accounts from believers worldwide describe the sensation of this covering as a sudden peace wrapping around them, a peace that remains even in chaotic or unpredictable environments. Behavioral specialists explain that the armor of light stabilizes internal battles, preventing fear, sadness, or confusion from slipping in unnoticed. It acts as both shield and atmosphere, surrounding the believer in divine confidence. Meanwhile, intelligence from the Heavenly Defense Division indicates that the armor of light is layered with specific components: protection, discernment, clarity, strength, and guidance. These layers function together, enabling the believer to navigate the challenges of the day with supernatural resilience. Officials emphasize that this armor is not passive. It actively counters every dark influence encountered. New data from spiritual analysts shows that the armor of light enhances awareness, sharpening a believer's perception of God's voice. Reports reveal that decisions made while covered by this armor tend to be wiser, calmer, and more aligned with heaven's direction. Correspondents call this a clarity effect, a phenomenon where confusion is unable to gain access to the mind. In a dramatic revelation, it is now confirmed that the armor of light expands in strength whenever the believer maintains a posture of trust. The more one relies on God throughout the day, the brighter and stronger the armor becomes. Analysts observe that this prevents the enemy from launching counterattacks later in the afternoon or evening, securing the entire day under divine protection. Specialists also highlight the armor's offensive capabilities. Though primarily protective, the armor of light generates an atmosphere that weakens any dark presence that comes near. Fresh reports are coming in from the Heavenly Provision Department following confirmed descent of the armor of light in the previous hour. According to officials within the throne room, once a believer is fully covered and positioned under God's dominion, the next major development unfolds, the opening of heaven's provision for the day. Analysts are calling this moment the divine supply release, a powerful shift that alters the entire trajectory of the morning. Sources inside the throne room confirm that heaven's provision is not limited to material needs. It includes wisdom, ideas, strength, peace, opportunities, insight, protection, and divine solutions. This astonishing array of heavenly resources is reported to be strategically dispatched into the believer's path the moment they come under God's covering. Experts emphasize that this is not random blessing. This is heaven's intentional orchestration. Field correspondents observing the spiritual atmosphere describe a striking phenomenon. Once heaven's provision begins to flow, the very air around the believer changes. Stress evaporates, anxiety loses its grip, and a calm confidence settles in. Analysts believe this shift marks the activation of divine orchestration, where God begins arranging circumstances long before the believer encounters them. Connections to earlier chapters reveal the significance of this moment. The pre-dawn enemy attacks, Chapter 1, the throne room summons, Chapter 2, the explosive power praise, Chapter 3, the dominion-setting declarations, Chapter 4, and the protective armor of light, Chapter 5. We're all preparing for this, Heaven now steps into the day with you. Correspondents note that the believer is no longer reacting to life. The believer is being led by God through it. Experts from the Heavenly Logistics Division report that provision often arrives in forms people overlook. A sudden idea, unexpected clarity, a timely text, a peaceful feeling, an open door, closed door, or even a delay, all could be part of heaven's customized supply chain. Analysts warn that what looks inconvenient in the natural may actually be divine redirection in disguise. Eyewitness testimonies are flooding in from believers who experience this shift daily. Many describe moments where worry was instantly replaced by assurance, or where a problem that seemed impossible suddenly unraveled with ease. Behavioral specialists confirm that this is consistent with heaven's pattern. God releases provision before the challenge arrives, ensuring victory is already embedded into the day. Correspondents stationed at the Prayer Response Center reveal that heaven's provision increases when the believer walks in awareness. Those who remain sensitive to God's voice throughout the day report a higher frequency of divine guidance, often receiving answers before they consciously ask. Analysts refer to this phenomenon as the early supply effect, where God's help arrives earlier than the need itself. In new data released this morning, spiritual economists are reporting that heaven's provision multiplies when gratitude is present. A thankful heart appears to expand spiritual capacity, allowing more guidance, peace, and favor to flow. Officials confirm that gratitude acts as a magnet in the spiritual realm, drawing provision and accelerating breakthroughs. Meanwhile, the Heavenly Intervention Unit has issued a statement confirming that the enemy loses significant influence once heaven's provision is activated. Attempts to create fear, confusion, or discouragement are consistently disrupted. Analysts observe that provision is not merely blessing, it is strategy. Heaven ensures that every step you take is supplied, supported, and aligned with God's purposes. As this dramatic news cycle concludes, the message becomes clear. The armor of light surrounds you, but heaven's provision sustains you. You are not stepping into a day filled with uncertainty. You are stepping into a day preloaded with divine resources. Every challenge already has a solution waiting. Every need already has a supply prepared. What began as a battle before sunrise has transformed into a day carried by the supernatural flow of God's provision. Following confirmed release of heaven's provision earlier this morning, the Heavenly Operations Center has issued a new update. The believer has now entered the phase where divine supply transforms into divine empowerment. Officials are calling this a shift in spiritual operating mode. Instead of walking into the day burdened by pressure, the believer is now equipped to walk in supernatural power, authority, clarity, and confidence that originate directly from God. Sources from the throne room explain that this empowerment is not dependent on circumstances, but on presence. With the armor of light secured and heaven's provision actively flowing, the believer carries a spiritual momentum into every environment they enter. Analysts describe this as the empowered stride, a posture where fear shrinks, confidence rises, and the believer enters the day as one who is supported, supplied, and strengthened by heaven. Field correspondents stationed throughout the day's unfolding moments report a dramatic contrast between the empowered believer and those weighed down by pressure. While the world around them rushes, reacts, and collapses under stress, the believer moves with a steady peace that defies natural explanation. Specialists confirm that this composure is a direct result of heaven's presence overshadowing internal anxieties. Connections to earlier chapters reveal how this transformation occurred. The battle before sunrise attempted to weaken the heart, Chapter 1. The throne room summons provided access to divine presence, Chapter 2. Praise shattered the silence, Chapter 3. Declarations established dominion, Chapter 4. The armor of light provided covering, Chapter 5. Heaven's provision began orchestrating the day, Chapter 6. And now the natural result emerges. The believer walks in power, not pressure. Behavioral analysts from the Spiritual Renewal Department report that empowered believers exhibit heightened resilience. They respond to challenges with grace rather than panic, creativity rather than frustration, and faith rather than fear. This resilience, experts say, is not self-generated. It is a byproduct of divine empowerment fueling their steps. Correspondents in the decision-making sector note that clarity is one of the first signs of this empowerment. When faced with choices, the believer experiences a supernatural steadiness, sensing God's guidance with unusual sharpness. Analysts reveal that this guidance is part of the provision released earlier, now being activated in real time as the believer moves through their day. New field footage from the spiritual frontier shows that when empowered believers walk into stressful environments, homes, workplaces, conversations, the atmosphere around them shifts. Tension dissolves, confusion clears, and peace establishes dominance. Officials from the Heavenly Atmosphere Calibration Unit confirm that empowered believers carry an atmospheric effect. Wherever they walk, heaven walks with them. In a dramatic revelation this hour, the Heavenly Defense Command reports that pressure-based attacks lose effectiveness against empowered believers. Attempts to overwhelm their mind with fear, doubt, or frustration collapse instantly. Analysts attribute this to the armor of light interacting with heaven's provision, creating a shield that neutralizes pressure at its source. The Heavenly Command Center has just released a final, decisive update for this morning's unfolding spiritual operation. Following the believer's transition into walking in divine empowerment rather than earthly pressure, a new phase has now begun. The official commissioning of the believer as a warrior rising into the day. Officials describe this commissioning as a divine send-off, a moment when heaven declares a believer ready, equipped, and assigned for the victories ahead. Sources from within the throne room reveal that this commissioning is not ceremonial. It is strategic. Heaven recognizes that the believer, now covered in the armor of light, supplied with divine provision, and empowered with spiritual authority, is positioned to influence every environment they encounter. Analysts say this is the point where the believer's morning devotion transitions into their daily mission. Field correspondents stationed at the spiritual gateways of the day report a dramatic upgrade in the believer's spiritual posture. Instead of stepping into the world cautiously or reactively, the believer now moves forward with a decisive stride of a commissioned warrior, one who knows that heaven is not behind them, but with them. Officials describe this as a forward movement of supernatural confidence. Connections to earlier chapters reveal how this commissioning was prepared. The enemy attempted to sabotage the morning before it started, Chapter 1. The throne room summoned the believer, Chapter 2. Praise shattered the darkness, Chapter 3. Declarations established dominion, Chapter 4. The armor of light sealed protection, Chapter 5. Heaven's provision began flowing, Chapter 6. And empowerment replaced pressure, Chapter 7. Now all of these elements converge into the believer's official assignment for the day. Eyewitness testimonies from believers around the world describe the commissioning moment as a sudden surge of purpose, a realization that today is not ordinary, and neither are they. Behavioral specialists from the Spiritual Identity Institute explain that this awareness is heaven's intentional reminder that every believer is chosen, anointed, and released into the world with authority. Correspondents observing this commissioning event note that heaven entrusts specific roles for the day, bringing peace where there is chaos, carrying light into dark places, lifting others with encouragement, and demonstrating God's character in every interaction. Analysts confirm that these roles are not accidental. They are strategically assigned by heaven to influence the spiritual climate of families, workplaces, and communities. New intelligence from the Heavenly Strategy Division reveals that the believer's presence alone disrupts the enemy's activity as they move through the day. The armor of light radiates too brightly for darkness to remain unnoticed, and heaven's empowerment flows too strongly for pressure to regain control. Officials confirm the believer is no longer just protected. They are now a weapon of righteousness in motion. In a dramatic announcement, angels assigned to the believer have been mobilized for full day support. Reports indicate that these heavenly beings accompany the believer into every meeting, conversation, journey, and decision they encounter. Analysts explain that the commissioning activates angelic alignment, ensuring the believer is never alone in their mission. Testimonies from the field show that believers walking in their commissioning see opportunities differently. What others call coincidence, they recognize as divine setup. What others fear, they meet with faith. What others avoid, they approach with wisdom. Specialists confirm that this mindset is evidence of the believer operating under their heavenly assignment rather than earthly limitation. As this final morning report concludes, the headline becomes overwhelmingly clear. You do not merely wake up. You rise. You rise as a warrior. You rise with purpose. You rise carrying heaven's authority into the earth. The battle before sunrise has been defeated. The throne room has spoken, and heaven has released you. Today is not just another day. It is your assignment, your commissioning, and your victory waiting to unfold. The previous chapter closed with breaking news from the spiritual front lines. Dawn responding to the sound of intercession. Now, as the story continues, a new report is emerging, one that shifts from battle to companionship. Observers are noting a profound development in the early hours. God himself is drawing near to walk with those who invited him first into their day. This is no longer just warfare. It is partnership presence and divine companionship unfolding with the rising sun. Correspondents station at the spiritual horizon report an extraordinary shift in the atmosphere. Where darkness once attempted to establish its influence, a golden radiance now spreads across the morning, not merely as sunlight, but as evidence of divine nearness. The light does not simply illuminate, it occupies, it claims, it surrounds. Angels are said to adjust formation not for combat this time, but to accompany a king taking his morning walk with his people. Officials within the heavenly command center confirm what prophets have long whispered. When a believer opens a day with prayer, God does not respond from a distance. He steps into the space. Witnesses in the spiritual realm describe a relational procession, a sacred movement in which the Creator joins the created. It is a moment that transforms ordinary routines into holy ground. The mundane becomes majestic under the weight of divine presence. Reports from the human side of the story detail remarkable emotional and mental shifts as well. Individuals who woke burdened are now experiencing calm that defies logic, clarity that sharpens thought, and strength that grounds their spirit. Psychologists may call it focus, analysts may call it alignment, but faith reporters are calling it what it truly is: companionship with God breaking through the morning haze. Investigations reveal that God's nearness in the morning is not symbolic. It is operational. Guidance begins to flow subtly, gently. Ideas arriving at just the right moment. Solutions surfacing out of nowhere. Peace settling like soft morning dew. Heaven is not only watching. It is advising. It is directing. It is whispering the path forward before the world even wakes. Sources among spiritual intercessors testify that this chapter of the morning is where believers begin to walk in step with God. Not ahead of him, not behind him, but beside him. The early hours become a synchronized march, one heart aligning with another. And as this alignment strengthens, so does the ability to discern, to resist, to walk in purpose without being shaken by the noise of the day. Meanwhile, the forces of darkness, previously active in the pre-dawn hours, have withdrawn to a considerable distance. Observers note their hesitation, even their frustration, as the presence of God saturates the morning terrain. They cannot approach the brightness. They cannot disrupt the partnership now formed. Where God walks, interference fails. Where God accompanies, fear dissolves. Cameras in the spiritual newsroom capture a beautiful metaphor. The believer walking forward through the new day, and right beside them, shadowing their steps, is the form of a king whose presence alters everything he draws near to. The image is not loud or dramatic. It is steady, resolute, royal. Sources confirm that after the extraordinary development reported in Chapter 8, God walking with his people at dawn, the story does not end with companionship. In fact, new intelligence indicates that the moment God steps into a believer's morning, the entire trajectory of their day is altered. Now, heavenly administration has begun mobilizing resources, aligning events, and opening pathways that were previously obstructed. What started as a quiet walk at sunrise is quickly escalating into a full-scale divine operation throughout the day. Observers positioned along the timeline of the hours ahead report unusual atmospheric shifts around believers who began with prayer. Meetings that should have brought stress are now punctuated with unexpected favor. Doors that historically resisted movement are swinging open as if pushed by an invisible hand. Analysts describe this as divine orchestration, a coordinated series of alignments where God adjusts circumstances long before his children arrive at them. Meanwhile, on the spiritual battlefield, surveillance indicates that darkness has not given up, but has instead changed tactics. Unable to confront God's presence head-on, these opposing forces now attempt subtle interference. Discouragement through minor inconveniences, emotional distractions, and unexpected disruptions. However, correspondents note that such attempts are repeatedly failing. Wherever a believer walks under God's covering, attempts at sabotage dissolve like shadows under a rising flame. Military strategists within the heavenly ranks report that angelic units have expanded their perimeter of protection. This shift signifies the day's new phase, not merely defensive shielding but active advancement. Angels are now escorting believers into opportunities pre-approved by Heaven's command center. These aren't random blessings. They are assignments, regions God wants them to influence, conversations he plans to use, moments he intends to transform. Reports from the ground highlight an unusual confidence rising in the hearts of believers. Journalists embedded within human routines have witnessed ordinary individuals suddenly sensing direction, purpose, and courage in their steps. What psychologists might call intuition, faith reporters recognize as divine prompting, the quiet voice of God guiding each moment, continuing the walk that began at dawn. At corporate offices, schools, construction sites, hospitals, and homes, testimonies are emerging at an unprecedented rate. People describe moments where they felt carried, guided, strengthened, or shielded at unexpected times. Investigators reviewing these accounts see unmistakable patterns, the unmistakable fingerprints of the one who joined them in the early morning hours and refused to leave their side. Economic analysts observing the flow of the day report significant increases in problem-solving efficiency among those who prayed first. Deadlines once overwhelming now unfold with clarity. Emotional storms that typically erupt are calm before they form. Even relational tensions seem to lose their power. It appears that when God walks with someone, the day itself obeys his rhythm, moving in harmony rather than chaos. Counterintelligence officers within the spiritual realm confirm that demonic strategies grow increasingly disorganized as the day progresses. With every hour a believer continues in God's presence, the enemy's influence weakens, its plans unravel, and its access points close. This phenomenon is being reported globally. The more a believer remains conscious of God's nearness, the fewer footholds darkness can claim. In dramatic late-day updates, reporters have observed something almost cinematic, moments when the presence of God becomes evident even to those who do not recognize him. A sudden peace in a tense room, a timely word in a difficult conversation, a breakthrough idea in a stagnant meeting. Witnesses describe these as holy interruptions, divine fingerprints appearing in the middle of earthly hours. Following the earlier reports of heaven orchestrating the entire day for believers who invited God first into their morning, the evening hours have begun revealing a new and dramatic development. Darkness is now retreating in frustration. Analysts say this level of disruption in enemy operations is directly traced back to the morning prayer that set the entire day under divine governance. What began at dawn is now echoing into the night, shaking the kingdom of darkness with consequences it did not anticipate. As twilight settles, surveillance from the spiritual front lines shows an unusual pattern. Demonic forces are attempting late-hour counterattacks. Their primary target, the believer's mind as the day winds down. This includes whispers of exhaustion, sudden waves of discouragement, and attempts to rewrite the narrative of the day into something less victorious. But correspondents report these attacks are sputtering, scattering, and losing impact because the divine walk that began in the morning has not ceased. Specialists within Heaven's Strategy Division confirm that God's presence does not fade with sunset. In fact, it intensifies. As the world grows quiet and internal reflections rise, believers are discovering moments of unexpected peace, clarity, and gratitude. Investigators are calling this the evening covering, a sacred extension of God's morning companionship that shields the close of the day just as fiercely as it guarded the beginning. Eyewitness accounts from believers show a remarkable theme. Instead of collapsing into fatigue, many are experiencing a supernatural strength surfacing as the night approaches. What should be weariness has become renewal. What should be stress has turned into reflection. What should be mental chaos has transformed into spiritual alignment. Faith reporters have identified this as residual morning glory, the lasting impact of starting the day with God. On the other side of the conflict, enemy intelligence appears to be in disarray. Darkness underestimated the power of the morning invitation, failing to anticipate that one prayer could ripple across an entire day and bleed into the night. Demonic entities that plan to regain territory in the evening now find those gates sealed. Their influence is being rejected before it can even form. Their strategies crumble like sand under the weight of divine favor. In a dramatic unfolding of events, angels who escorted believers throughout the day are now repositioning around their homes. Sources within the Spiritual Defense Network confirm these as night watch details, assigned to fortify the believer's environment and silence any lingering attempts at spiritual disturbance. Observers have noted the presence of peace settling over households like a warm mantle, tangible, calming, authoritative. At the same time, divine whispers continue guiding the believer's heart, this time not toward decisions or actions, but toward rest. After a day of movement, heaven is now directing the believer into restoration. It is a reminder that God not only walks with his children, he guards their rest, redeems their sleep, and strengthens their mind for the day to come. This transition marks the beginning of what analysts describe as the cycle of divine continuity. Human-side reporters tracking emotional patterns in believers have identified something astonishing: gratitude rising spontaneously,